This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovators Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome to Killer Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. We are here each and every week talking about innovation, creativity, and design. We also broadcast the show live on Facebook. We also are on Zoom. If you are ever interested in participating and being able to get your questions asked during the show, just go over to killerinnovations.com/live, and you can choose one of many options to listen to the show, including Facebook Live, on Zoom, who is a technology sponsor for this show, along with listening directly from BizTalk Radio, who is the syndicator that syndicates our show, and they make that audio stream available. The show does come out as a podcast each Tuesday morning. You can find us over on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast feeds. The difference between the Sunday show and the Tuesday podcast is the podcast does not have any of the commercials. So you can subscribe and get those downloaded each and every week. Show notes are over at killerinnovations.com, so you can find all the links, anything we talk about in the show. We make sure all those links are up there over on the show notes, and so therefore you don't have to worry about, if you're driving in your car, scribbling a bunch of notes. We'll make those easily available for you. So this week's guest is Danielle Ep16. Danielle's the co-founder and CEO of Other Machine, which is a California, Silicon Valley-based, well, I don't know. I'm from the Valley. I don't quite qualify Berkeley as being in the Valley, but we can have that argument. Which has developed a desktop manufacturing product that is actually quite interesting. Went through a Kickstarter, did the whole Kickstarter thing, but it actually started much, much earlier. And we're going to get to that. But Danielle, I've heard your story. I've watched some YouTube video interviews of you. I've heard a little bit of your story about how you actually got kind of that, the engineering bug, doing, I guess it was some work with your dad. And see, I do my research. You never know what question. You never know what question I'm going to ask you. So let's back up. How'd you get interested in kind of the engineering manufacturing realm of the world?
For me, it started with problem solving around the house, and the story that you might have heard about me working with my dad was being able to modify things around the house to make them more wheelchair accessible or just better for the whole family. And I was front and center for all of that, whether it was, doing the measuring myself or just being asked, I think was the first part. Like, hey, there's a problem here. Let's see if we can understand it. Okay, let's try to come up with a solution. And that just feeds naturally into engineering, whether you're engineering a chemical or a car. It's all about problem solving.
So how old were you when you felt like you kind of got that early, exposure?
It's funny. I don't ever remember not doing that, whether it was being on the floor, scribbling on butcher paper or whatever it was. It just was always part of what we did. And living out in the country is kind of like that. If you grow up on a farm, which we didn't, but we just lived in rural Arkansas, there's not a lot for you out there. You have to figure out solutions to the problems, especially in the early 80s. There's no Amazon, and maybe UPS comes once a week, but besides that, you're on your own.
Yeah. It's those early experiences, though, do have kind of a profound effect. For me, it was architecture. My mom was a double amputee above the knee, and I got interested in architecture from the standpoint of, modifying house designs in order to accommodate, 36-inch doors and wheelchair ramps. And unfortunately, when I moved to Virginia, many, many years later, I was able to actually design our house so that my mom could actually come visit. And there's nothing better than doing that. Now, I never became an architect, never finished the architecture degree. I switched to engineering. But it is interesting how those family experiences kind of do have that impact on, kind of igniting the spark. So where did you do your undergrad at?
I went to MIT and studied chemical engineering there.
Chemical engineering.
Yeah. It was a while before I figured out that I didn't actually want to do chemical engineering. I was just like, MIT, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna, this is what I want to do and where I want to go. But I didn't do a ton of research about what chemical engineering was. Turns out it's not like, hey, engineer this chemical for me. It's more like figure out a way to make metric tons of this chemical. It's very process oriented, which I love process. But it wasn't until grad school that I really got to find out my true passion in engineering, which was materials science.
Yeah, well, it's interesting about how many people the undergrad typically has no correlation to what they do in life, right? So,
Yeah.
I've got a guy that works for me who's got a PhD in geology, and he's head of the advanced technology group in network technologies. Nothing to do with geology at all.
Yeah. Well, again, it's problem solving though. Any engineering degree,
Well, a good engineering degree, and we can have this conversation because one of the challenges when I was CTO at HP, one of our challenges was with interns is that our society has gotten so much to the educational model of test taking versus really having critical thinking skills and really good problem solving skills. We get these 250 interns a summer, and you'd give them a problem, and they're looking for the formula to come out with, whip out their calculator, calculate it out, and give you the one answer. And reality is, to any given problem, there's typically more than one possible answer, and you need to go figure out, which is the correct one.
Yeah, I think there's the being able to draw from everything that you know and come up with a unique solution, but also to be able to say no. There's an infinite amount of possibilities, and how do you have the discipline, the mental discipline to winnow it down to the 2 or 3 that you should really move forward with? Because it's like the analysis paralysis thing. There's just too many options. So being able to coalesce a solution and also say just the discipline to say not that one, only these ones.
Right, exactly. And otherwise people want to do and cover the entire ground, or search under every rock versus saying it's more than likely underneath that rock there and not that rock there. So where'd you do your grad school at?
I went to UT Austin, University of Texas.
Oh, okay. Michael Dell's home campus.
Oh yeah, I forgot about the HP.
Yeah, no, Michael, Dell Computer started in a dorm room at Austin. So he always gets teased on the fact that since he was using university resources, does the university actually own part of the company or not?
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Well, it doesn't, but it's always been the joke. I've known Mike. I've known the team at Dell for quite some years. But then you actually then went off and did extend in the government. You actually went to DARPA.
Yeah, we had a DARPA-funded research project. That was the first thing that I did after grad school. There was an R&D incubator in San Francisco called Other Lab, and they had gotten a grant from DARPA to build desktop-sized manufacturing tools for the classroom. And the reason that they wanted to do that was they saw the detriment of removing shop class from high schools. And they said, okay, we, are bad. We need to put a shop class back into high schools. But this time, in addition to all of the manual labor type of craftsman type skills, we also want to do digital design and computer controlled manufacturing tools so that we can have a generation of people who come out of high school ready to go into engineering or manufacturing and build up that knowledgeable workforce that we had lost over the previous decades.
It's actually quite interesting because yesterday I delivered the opening keynote to the Colorado Maker Hub, which is the group that brings together all of the maker spaces in the state of Colorado. And the whole topic was about this problem of taking out, whether it be shop classes or even wet labs, out of the school systems and not giving really the kids, that exposure. So it was kind of an interesting topic about how big the challenge really is. But what's interesting is I get calls from a lot of states that are all trying to figure out, one, how do they create their own Silicon Valley? Everybody wants to be Silicon Valley or Silicon Prairie or Silicon Cornfield or whatever. But really, the challenge is not creating Silicon Valley. It is about the educational system, which feeds a workforce that has that passion and has that energy and has that desire to go do that. So we're going to pick this up right when we come back from this commercial break. Talk a little bit more about the product that you're working on in desktop manufacturing, and also talk a little bit more about the role that education plays in creating these kinds of opportunities. So stay right there. We're going to be right back after this commercial break. You're listening to Killer Innovations on the BizTalk Radio Network.
BizTalkRadio.com.
This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovators Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome back to Killer Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. Show each week we're here talking about creativity, innovation, and design. This week we're interviewing Danielle Epplestone. Danielle is the co-founder and CEO of Other Machine, based out in Berkeley, California. Danielle, we were laughing in the first segment, does a bachelor's in the chemical engineering space, but then all of a sudden switched over to being able to do manufacturing from the standpoint of the other company called Other Machine Company, and then she went on to DARPA. Danielle, we were talking in the first segment really about how you came out of that project at DARPA and then turned it into this desktop manufacturing systems. So tell us a little bit about Other Machine and then how that got started, and then maybe talk a little bit about that the Kickstarter and the support that you got on Kickstarter for the project.
Yeah, absolutely. So we started with DARPA building these desktop-sized machines for the classroom. And what they wanted was the simplest way to be able to teach people computer-controlled manufacturing. And this is really just a shrunken down version of what you would see in a factory. So you have a large machine, maybe $100,000 or more dollars that you need to get trained to operate. And what we wanted to do was shrink that down to a size that could be carried around from classroom to classroom and wouldn't take a lot of training in order to run. And we built a couple different kinds of machines. We built a vibrating knife cutter, which you could feed cardboard into, and you could cut shapes in that, a little bit like a laser cutter, but a little bit safer for the classroom. And then we also built a desktop milling machine.
Yeah, and so in this case, you did this work under the DARPA project, and then in order to start building a business, then you actually went off and did the Kickstarter. So you used a little bit of money to actually get everything ready for the Kickstarter. So what was it like taking that idea and actually doing a Kickstarter for it?
Well, we had to run the Kickstarter quite by surprise. We were supposed to have 3 years of funding for the DARPA project, but ended up only having one due to government sequestration in spring of 2013. But by that time, the team was so dedicated to the idea of increasing accessibility to these manufacturing tools that we're like, we'll do whatever it takes. Because we saw that there was this need out there, and if we didn't do something, it's just going to get worse. Mm-hmm. So we decided to run the Kickstarter campaign as a last-ditch effort. I tried to raise money. It was kind of like, I'm a scientist. I come to Silicon Valley to run an education project, and then all of a sudden it's time to fundraise and go around to venture capitalists. And
the accidental entrepreneur, right?
That's right. but we weren't able to fundraise in time. So we're like, all right, let's run a Kickstarter campaign and we'll sort it out afterwards.
So how much were you looking for to get off of the original Kickstarter? What was your target?
We just wanted to sell 50 machines because we thought if we can sell 50 machines, we can tell the story of this group of 50 people who were interested in a desktop machine that could prototype circuit boards. So we went for a very narrow story, and we're just going to sell 50. We actually sold 200 and raised over $300,000, which was even better for us because that was the story that I could tell when I went back out and fundraised eventually.
So it's one of it's one of those stories where you have that target, and all of a sudden, rather than worrying about manufacturing 50, now you got to find a way to manufacture 200.
Yeah. It's the strange thing is how awful it would have been if we had needed to manufacture 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
Because we had no idea what we were doing. 200, we could, the last ditch effort would be, let's just build them all ourselves. Let's just build every single part and put it all together and ship it out to people. I think sometimes when people run Kickstarter campaigns, they're flooded and then they have to create a manufacturing process that supports a big number when in reality their like monthly sales number will be much smaller than that. So
yeah, well, I get a lot of those phone calls from those Kickstarter guys because of at HP, when you got to manufacture 40 million laptops, you kind of have a process figured out. And these Kickstarter people are like, well, I just thought we could just have my buddies in with pizza and beer on a weekend and crank this out. And I'm like, that's not going to work. Not for 10,000 units or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, but it's interesting that, and you've been successful at taking that Kickstarter then and actually going off and doing a fundraise then.
Yeah, we have raised $6 million total from 40 investors, which is a mix of angels and institutional venture capital folks, and then also bank loan. I mean, we've done everything necessary. Like whatever we have to do to get it done, we've done.
That's perfect. Yeah. So when we come back, what I'm going to do is I want to talk a little bit more specifically about where you're at from the business perspective and the product. Getting into a little more detail on the product, but also give some advice to some of the people out there who are trying to get an idea and take it forward. What advice you would have, being the accidental entrepreneur that you are. So stay right there. We're going to come back after this commercial break. Hopefully we can avoid any more technical snafus in the process of today's show. But stay right there. We're going to be right back after this commercial break. You're listening to Killer Innovations on the BizTalk Radio Network. We'll be right back.
BizTalkRadio.com.
This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovators Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome back to Killer Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. Before we get back into the show, though, I do need to take a quick moment and thank one of our sponsors. Now, you're probably saying, hold on, Phil, you've been doing this show for 12 years and you've never had a sponsor. And you'd actually be correct. And I'll explain why we actually having a sponsor for the show. Now, a common ask I get from you, the listeners, is those of you who have an idea, but you lack maybe the technical skills or design skills to really take what you got in your head and turn it into a real product or even just a prototype to go off and show it to people. Now, we've all tried those outsourcing sites where you take your project plan, you submit it up there, you send it out. You're supposed to get the magic solution back, but I don't know about you, but I've just always have been disappointed. Our sponsor, TopTal, is different. For starters, they do a screening process for every technical and design talent they have, to the point that only 1.6% of the people that apply ever get accepted in. Now, this assures you that you're going to have the A team. You're not going to get the B team and the C team. You're only going to have the absolute best. A lot of big companies use TopTal, like JP Morgan and Pfizer, but even smaller startup companies like Airbnb and Zendesk use TopTal. And in fact, for a lot of startup companies that are in the big incubators like Y Combinator and Techstars, the engineering teams are TopTal engineering teams supporting the incubators. Now, for listeners of Kill Innovations, you can try TopTal at zero risk. You can start a project, and if within the first 2 weeks you aren't absolutely convinced they're killing it, you get 100% of your money back, and you get to keep the deliverables. So go over to toptal.com/Phil, start your project. Or just better yet, just drop me a note at phil@killerinnovations.com, and I'll make the personal introduction. Make sure you get the VIP treatment. Now, question you're going to have is why do we have a sponsor? We've never had a sponsor in 12 years. Why are we doing a sponsor? Well, first, my mission is to equip you with the knowledge, skills, and input on how to take your idea and turn it into that game-changing innovation. And you need good talent, and TopTal can do that for you. Second, taking on a sponsor just helps cover the cost for the show. I've been funding the show out of my pocket for 12 years. And for me bringing on sponsors, it actually frees up those dollars to contribute to the nonprofits. So if you've been a listener for the show for quite some time, you know that 100% of the royalties from my book, the 100% of revenue that I make on any of my coaching work or any of those kinds of things go to the two nonprofits that I support, hackingautism.org and pioneer.education. So by bringing on sponsors, it frees up those dollars not to pay for the show's production, but now can actually go in and fund those nonprofits. So what are you waiting for? I've said it 1,000 times before. If you got an idea but you don't execute it, it's a great mental exercise, but it's of zero value. You need to go do it. Take that idea and do something with it. So go over to toptal.com/Phil, start your project, or just drop me an email, and I'll introduce you to Nelson and the guys over at TopTal, and I'll make sure you get the top-notch treatment for that. So Danielle, we were talking in the last break. You started getting into a little bit of the Kickstarter project. You were going to do 50. You got 200, and then you've been able to go out and you raised $6 million. So you've gone from a scientist to doing an education project to now being a co-founder, CEO, entrepreneur. For a company that, hey, I'll put all the links out there, but you can go out and just search for Danielle's name or the company name, and you'll see a bunch of articles out there. A lot of good press on it, a lot of really great excitement. So tell us some stories. You've got these product out there. What are your customers doing with it? Why are the customers seem to be so excited about what it is you're doing?
I think the thing that I am most proud of and is the most interesting is that there are 8-year-old girls in Hawaii who use our product and engineers at NASA that use the product. And they are all designing things that are their ideas, and they're making prototypes, and they're learning that process. And there's not a lot of technologies that are doing that. And so I feel extremely proud, but you can imagine that our folder full of customer project photos are really interesting, from the most intense electronics and very tiny devices and tiny pieces of metal that are super precise that, industrial engineers are using to, hey, I made this blinky thing. Like, this is my first project ever. And they are both camps of people are equally excited about the thing that comes out of the machine. And I really think that because we've been able to do this and put it into schools, even like middle schools or elementary schools, it points to me to where the future is. Like, this is a tool that if you want to build physical things, you'll need a laptop and you'll need these types of machines, a small laser cutter, small milling machine, a 3D printer. But it unlocks this whole period of time. These girls don't have to wait until they're 35 and engineers at Boeing or whatever. They can start building right now. And I feel like that is just going to open up a ton of possibilities for kids who are interested in using their hands.
So in this case, we've talked kind of around it that it's a desktop CNC machine, but maybe describe a little bit about the kind of things that people could do with your device, because you can do everything from metal to wood to plastic, a whole wide range of materials.
Yeah. The product itself is 17 pounds. It's about a 14-inch cube, and you run it using your computer. So you have a piece of software that has a design, and then the machine will turn on a very sharp cutting tool. So it's kind of like a drill bit, but a different shape. And then the machine moves that drill bit over a block of material. Like if you put a block of metal in there, like aluminum, it will move the tool over the aluminum and cut away the things that you don't want and then leave your part behind. So it's kind of the opposite of a 3D printer. 3D printer adds layers, we subtract layers. And people use it to make a wide variety of things. A lot of people want to do printed circuit boards because instead of waiting a couple days to get it back from a manufacturer, you can just get it in 20 minutes. And so it speeds up the pace of iteration that these engineers can do.
And what does one of the devices cost?
The Other Mill Pro we just launched last month, and it is $31.99, so about $3,200.
Yeah, well, and my dad was in the machine tool industry, right? And I remember when, you couldn't get anything smaller than a room. So when you think about it, is right. You started off with big CNC machines, 3-axis machines, and you're coming in. And they were millions of dollars. You had to build an entire building around it. Now you got it down to 14 inches or 17 inches. It's almost the same experience in computers, right? When you think about computers being these masses filling up entire buildings, to now you carry it in your pocket, and you can take it with you wherever you go.
Yeah.
And I think it is this whole concept of micromanufacturing. I think it's great from a design and giving people hands-on experience, but it isn't a toy. It does real work and can have a much broader kind of impact. We were talking during one of the earlier commercial breaks about, my interest in this also extends over into some of the work that we're doing in Africa, where we need, you want to ship something into Rwanda, you got to plan 3 months ahead. And if a part breaks in Rwanda and they don't have the part locally, you're waiting 3 months until you get a replacement part in. And I've been looking at micromanufacturing as a way, particularly in developing countries, to deal with a supply chain problem where you are a landlocked country, very hard to get to. You got transport between two other countries to get to your country. And can you just bypass that by just sending me the digital file and let me manufacture locally? So we're going to... that I think just opens up all kinds of possibilities. So we're going to need to we're getting ready to come up on a commercial break here. Before we go to the commercial break, though, Danielle, I want to invite you to stay for the fourth segment because I want to continue the conversation. And so, therefore, we're going to go to commercial break. But when we come back from commercial break, we're going to pick up this conversation. But I also want to ask you the piece of advice that you would give entrepreneurs, maybe the 2 or 3 things that you learned coming from being a scientist to doing an educational project with DARPA to all of a sudden being thrusted to being an entrepreneur. What are kind of those few things that you wish you knew back when the whole thing started? So we're going to ask that question. I have Danielle. I'm putting her a little bit on the spot. She gets the commercial break to think about this. But I think I think it'd be interesting. I'm anxious to hear your answers on that. So we're going to jump off to a quick commercial break here. And when we come back, we're going to pick up the conversation with Danielle, getting her perspective of now being kind of thrusted in as an entrepreneur CEO. So stay right there. You're listening to Killer Innovations on the BizTalk Radio Network.
BizTalkRadio.com.
This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovators Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome back to Killer Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. We're picking up this fourth segment with Danielle Applestone. Danielle is the co-founder and CEO of Other Machine Company. It's based in Berkeley, Kickstarter company that almost had to do Kickstarter almost out of requirement in order to scramble and survive. Did it quite successfully. Now's raised $6 million. But coming from being a scientist, or really a career path to being a scientist, to doing a DARPA contract work, to now being thrusted in as the co-founder and CEO of a quite successful company. So Danielle, as we were leaving the last segment, I posed to you the question of, now you're on this side of it. You've raised your money, you're growing, you're getting lots of really good, strong, positive press. What was it? What are a couple of those things that you wish you knew when you started down this whole path of going from a DARPA project to now birthing the company?
I think the number one thing that I wish I knew, it took me a while to realize this, while I was fundraising, in fact, was you can't be afraid to say your idea as large as you think it is. So it was really embarrassing at first to go out and pitch and say, well, I have this machine and we want to make this machine. But really, the thing that I wanted to pitch was the future of desktop manufacturing is going to look like, the future of manufacturing is going to look like a ton of specialized robots that are small, easy to operate, and everywhere. And that was kind of a crazy thing to say. It didn't feel right to say my whole idea. But it wasn't until I started to actually say the full idea that people started to really latch on, that investors were like, okay, I get it. You've got a big idea here. I want to be a part of it. And I think that people should just come right out and say it. If you have the big, crazy idea, you just have to come right out and say it.
Yeah, it's what I call creative confidence, right? Do you have the confidence to really tell your idea, or do we worry about conformity? We think, everybody operates in a much smaller box, and if you are too bold and too big, people will discount you or not support you.
Well, also there's the thought of like, am I really the person to do this? Like, is it going to be me? And the thing is that if you have that hunger for it, yes, it will be you.
Yeah.
Like, you can totally do it.
The thought process that it's only going to be somebody who's got 25 years experience or 50 years experience or who's already a big name. Look, I mean, Zuckerberg wasn't Zuckerberg when he started Facebook. The Google boys weren't Google, when they started. Henry Ford was not in the automotive industry when he came up with the automobile. It's the new people who have got just a unique perspective and a unique opinion. So what's one other thing you would share with wannabe innovators who are going to go off and try to translate that idea? What would be one other recommendation, or one thing you wish you knew before you started?
I don't think I would have done a Kickstarter campaign, because Kickstarter is not for starting a business. Because a business needs infrastructure and there's lots of costs associated with that. And Kickstarter is, you only get money for the cost of the thing that you're going to ship to people. And I would just caution people to ever doing that.
Yeah.
If your idea is big enough that you need to form a company and things, you need to do that offline first. And then you can run a Kickstarter to launch your product and get press and things like that. I definitely can't believe that we made it, honestly. It was very down to the wire, just kind of magical that we made it as far as we did. So I would have not, I wouldn't have done it the same way, knowing what I know now.
Now, one of the things that for the partners because now you're out of your Kickstarter, you've raised your money, you're in a mode of manufacturing product that you're selling and making available. Your partners, your suppliers are predominantly U.S. based, which is a little counterintuitive because most people have written off the U.S. manufacturing sector.
Yeah, I feel that is a total mistake because there's so many resources in the U.S. Now, I'll qualify that by saying if you want to make 10,000 or more of something, probably you need a larger contract manufacturer. But below that number, you can look around you, and even 80% of our bill of materials, like the parts for the machine, come from the US, and most of that is in the Bay Area. And one great benefit of that is that we can go and be face to face with people.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are new, you learn so much every time you communicate with a manufacturer, because they've been doing stuff for so long that when you get in front of them, you share your passion for your product with them, they get excited about it, and they educate you on things you never would have found out otherwise. It's so valuable. And I think that there's a lot of products that should be made that maybe you only need to make 1,000 a year or 3,000 a year or something like we do. But you might not ever know that that's possible around you. But we have definitely benefited from those types of relationships. And I don't know, my perspective is that manufacturing is strong in the United States. It just doesn't look like giant factories pumping out hundreds of thousands of products.
Yeah, it's interesting. It is, because people have written off the U.S. manufacturing sector, and I think you're exactly right. There's a huge amount of resources, particularly, even leading up to the early work, prototype work, low volume, till you get ramped up. You can de-risk versus doing an order a part from Alibaba, and then having to go through 3 or 4 cycles with 2 months in between each one, not knowing whether or not it's the right part, because you can't go eyeball to eyeball with the manufacturer. So if people want to follow up what you're working on, what's the best place where they can find you?
Othermachine.co is our website. They can see all the info there.
Perfect. Hey, Danielle, I want to really appreciate you taking the time out on your Sunday, joining us here on Killer Innovations. I do greatly appreciate it. For those listeners, you can check out the show notes over at killerinnovations.com. We'll have links to all of Danielle's contact information from the standpoint of the site, and some links to where you can actually see the product, see some of the articles that have been written about it. I'm sure I'm going to be on the hook to buy one now for my grandkids, because they're all into those things pretty early on. And so we're going to talk to you guys next week. Remember, check out the show notes at killerinnovations.com. If you want to get connected, text the word innovate to 33444. Otherwise, have a great week. Don't let the innovation antibodies get you down. Get out there and turn your idea into the next game-changing innovation. Good luck, and we'll talk to you next week.
The opinions you hear on Biz Talk Radio are those of the hosts, callers, and guests, and do not necessarily reflect those of this station, Biz Talk Radio, its management, or advertisers. The information on Biz Talk Radio does not constitute a recommendation, offer, or solicitation to buy or sell any product or service. If you have any questions about Biz Talk Radio, contact us at 817-274-1609 or at biztalkradio.com. biztalkradio.com.